Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Well, ho, ho, ho. Welcome to the holiday season. Now that American Thanksgiving is past me, I am ready to fully embrace my inner Christmas elf. After I finish filming this and editing it, I guess, I will be, decking my halls with boughs of holly, etc. I'm actually really excited. This is the first year I'm in this house, and so I get to see, I didn't buy any new Christmas stuff this year. I mostly just want to see how my existing Christmas stuff will or will not fill this house. So that will be fun. But anyway, we are past November, we're in December, we are in the final stretch, guys. And November was a very productive reading month for me. I do want to say that. I read 26 books. We'll get into how that happened, but I got a lot of things done in terms of some of the challenges I've been working on or things that I wanted to get to or whatever. So it was very productive. I will say, because of some of the things I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, where it's just been kind of a hard time at work. And then ultimately the last week of American Thanksgiving being very busy and ending up having a lot more plans than I'd anticipated having. I wouldn't say that I wasn't able to focus my reading as much as I normally can. And I have a lot of things still in progress right now as I end the month that, I'll probably finish up in December, but I'm not used to having this many things sort of in progress. So there was that. And then this was also the month of the 3.5 star book, which, if you don't know my scale, I consider a 3 to be a B. So it meets expectations, and a 4 to be B plus, A minus, really good, really enjoyed it. Probably closer to an A minus kind of book. And then a 3.5 is this wasn't great, but it did exceed my expectation in some way or another. So it's a little bit more than a 3-star. Very scientific, as you can tell. But anyway, so this was the month of books that were just a little bit above my expectations. And I didn't have very many things that were just true, loved it. So anyway, I don't know. All that to say, it just makes me feel a little more scattered in my reading. And I guess as we go through this wrap up, we will find out if that holds. So anyway, without further ado, let me dive into some stats, and then we will get into my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits for the month of November in my reading. Okay, so like I was saying, I did read 26 books in the month of November, which honestly surprised me because it didn't feel like that many. The reason I'm pretty sure is because since it was nonfiction November, I was focusing a lot more on nonfiction, and I often, those aren't books that I can just sort of read straight through. I tend to sort of pick them up and put them down quite a bit. And the thing I was kind of interspersing with it was a lot of lighter things, so a lot of romance and mystery kind of sprinkled in there with the nonfiction. So we'll talk about that when we get to the genre. But I actually ended up reading a lot of things, which kind of surprised me. I read 7,245 pages with an average page length of 279 pages. That makes sense because those more light genre-y things tend to be a little shorter. So 23 of those 26 books were from my TBR, and 3 I got from the library or through subscription service. The average age of the book that I was reading was 12 years old, so that was great. And the average length of time that these books have been on my TBR was 14 months, which is longer than I like. I really am trying, and we'll talk about this when we get to my 2020 goals early next year. I'm really trying to get better about when things come into my collection, getting to them relatively quickly, especially for my physical books. I'm trying. It's a journey, guys. Okay. And then in terms of genre, as I was mentioning earlier, biggest genre I read was contemporary romance, followed then by mystery. But if you took contemporary, historical, and what I would call speculative romance together, that would have been my biggest category. Followed, if you kind of group things together, by nonfiction. So I read 3 historical nonfiction, 3 just sort of general nonfictions, and 1 memoir. And then I also read 2 fantasy novels. So a pretty focused reading month in terms of genre, but not super atypical for me. And then, as I was mentioning in terms of rating, so my average rating was 3.46, which really validates my feeling that this was the month of the 3.5 star rating. But I did have 1 2-star, 2 2.5 stars, 4 3 stars, 10 3.5 stars, and then 9 4 stars. So those are the overall stats. And then getting to things that I read for challenges. Like I was saying earlier, I did make some really good progress on my challenges this month. So in terms of challenges, as always, I made progress on my in-depth, oh, I shouldn't say as always, because definitely earlier in the year I wasn't doing as good on this, but my in-depth series challenge in terms of finishing that off this year, I am almost certain that's going to happen at this point because I only have 2 full novels left to read. But I was able to read Human in Death, Morality and Mortality in J.D. Robb's novels by Kecia Ali. This was a book I wanted to get to because I wanted to get far enough in the in-depth series that I could read this literary study of it, which I did, and I quite enjoyed, would recommend. I also read Dark in Death and Leverage in Death, and then I just finished, like right before we filmed this, I just finished Festive in Death. I think I gave this one 3.5 stars, and then I gave this one 3 stars. Both of these were still very entertaining and very enjoyable. This got a 3-star, which is low for the in-depth series for me, just because I didn't think there was anything extra about it. I did think there was a little something extra in this one, so I gave it 3.5, and then Festive in Death, I really liked the ending of it, and it had tons of great character time, so lots of like hangout time with our favorite characters, basically. That I very much enjoyed. So all of those were entertaining, as always. It's very rare for me to not enjoy an in-depth book. From my classics TBR, I read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, and I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, but I've actually completed my classics challenge for the year. Dun dun dun, everybody, yay, hooray, good job me. So I actually filmed a wrap-up of all of the classics I read, so that will be going up, I think, next weekend. But yeah, this was good, 4 stars, enjoyed it. And then I did read 3 books from my 19 books that I want to read in 2019 list. I did not get through 2 of the ones I was also hoping to polish off this month, but it will happen in December. So Born Again Bodies by R. Marie Griffith. We will talk more about this one in a little bit. Blessed by Kate Bowler. I'm not going to talk about this one in particular. 3.5 stars on this one. Good, not great. And then Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which we will also talk about later. So I think those were all the challenges I addressed. Oh, I should say that I did also, based on some of the books I read this month, make a little progress on my Reading Women Bingo Board Challenge. Braiding Sweetgrass also is a book about nature by a woman, so I filled in that one. And then a children's book, I decided that middle grade counted, so I went with Nevermore for that, which I finally finished this month. Guys, aren't you so proud? If you are a longtime watcher of this channel, you know that I've been on a journey with that book. So I finally finished that. And then, I think I went back and looked at my TBR and realized that I did have a cover pick. I decided to put Monstrous Volume 3 here because, like, it's a graphic novel and I love the art, so by definition it would be a cover pick. And then historical fiction, I put Jane Steele. So that, I have a bingo here, I have a bingo here, and I have a bingo here. So I have 3 bingos, and then if I can get these 2, so They All Fall Down by Rachel Housel Hall, I believe, and then Difficult Women by Roxane Gay, which I'm in progress on right now. If I get those 2, then I will meet my goal of 5 bingos. So I was a little surprised when I realized that because I thought that wasn't going to happen at all. Okay, I think that's all the challenge talk. So let's start with disappointments and then we'll work our way up. Okay, I had 2 disappointments I wanted to mention this month because, like I said, most things were at least fine, but one of these I think was bad and the other one was just disappointing. So I did read No Groom at the Inn by Megan Frampton. We will talk about a different Christmas novella from her later in the hits section. This was a historical romance Christmas novella, and the premise was basically a marriage of convenience. This guy is traveling home for Christmas. He's told his mom that he's engaged. He needs to get a fiance like right there, and he happens upon this woman who is basically been left financially destitute by her father at his death and is going to have to go live with like these terrible cousins who are just basically going to use her as like a babysitter. And he offers to be fake engaged to her, and then he'll buy her like a little cottage at the end of it, and everybody's gonna be happy. So it's a fake marriage of convenience thing. All of these things are so up my alley, which again, we will talk about more later because her other Christmas novella definitely has some similarities here. I will say though that this was just so disappointing. It was not great. It was pretty bad. It just felt like it was a first draft on every level. So like the characters felt like they were first draft characters, like they hadn't been fully thought through. The writing was not great and felt like a first draft. And then there was just like these weird pacing plot things that just didn't work. So I gave it a 2-star and I was very disappointed. Part of the reason I was disappointed was because one of the reviewers that I follow and whose taste very closely mirrors mine, I saw had given it a 5-star. So I was expecting I was really gonna like this and I just didn't think it was good. So that was the worst thing I read this month. And I think it was just not great. I would steer you away from it. The other thing that I would call a disappointment, it wasn't that this was bad. This just it was disappointing. I gave this 3 stars, A Christmas Party by Georgette Hare. As I mentioned, I think in my mid-month wrap-up, I was definitely in the mood to read an isolated closed circle mystery. You guys know I love those. And this time of year, there's so many of them that are based on the idea of everybody getting together for Christmas and then, people dying. So I will tell you, first of all, this is not a true isolated closed circle mystery because people can come and go, even though there's a lot of snow. It is Christmassy. I think that it's got a pretty decent amount of Christmas spirit in it. And it does follow a lot of the, just classic beats of a country house murder mystery, like old relative nobody likes with all the money, ends up dead, and everybody in the house kind of wanted him dead. I don't really know what to tell you about why I didn't like this more. There was something about the authorial voice in this that just really didn't connect for me. I felt like I was being held at kind of an arm's length distance the whole time. We'll talk about a different book that did not do this, that reminded me of like, oh yeah, this isn't just that it's an old-timey book and sometimes the prose is just a little off to a modern ear. It's not just that. It's specifically to what Hare is doing, and it just didn't really work for me. There were several points of this book, and I can't really get into it too much because it's a mystery and, I don't want to spoil it for you, but there's just several character types that I would have hoped she would subvert, and I just didn't really feel like she did. And I don't really enjoy those character types unless they're going to be subverted in some way. So all that to say, it just didn't ultimately end up really working very well for me. This is one that I wouldn't steer people away from because I think that if you ended up liking her writing style better than I did, you might like this. But I think for me, I don't really feel a need to revisit her again. In this case, I didn't like this enough to want to continue to try more from her, if that makes sense. So anyway, again, I wouldn't necessarily steer someone away from this, but I did find it disappointing because it had all the ingredients of something I would really love, but the writing is what kept me from actually ending up liking it all that much. So anyway, you will also see this in my 3 mystery review Christmas edition. That will be coming out in a couple weeks, I think. And so I will talk more about this one in that video. Okay then, moving into surprises. So I had a lot of things that I probably could have called surprises, but I just landed on 3. Let's start with one that I don't have in physical form, so that would be Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I should also mention, I think every single one of these surprises I gave 3.5 stars to, so again, welcome to the month of 3.5 stars. So Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I wasn't sure what to expect from this because I hadn't read any Naomi Novik before, and I've heard a lot of mixed responses to this book in particular. Not to her as an author, because I think the general consensus seems to be people agree she's a good author, but that this particular book and then the subsequent book from it, Spinning Silver, both of those were a little more hit or miss for people. And I guess I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. So I think what surprised me about this was that the things I really liked about this book didn't make me love the book enough to give it more than a 3.5 star, because things that I tend to really connect with in a fantasy novel are it being very character driven and writing. Those are 2 really big parts of what I like about a fantasy, and I really liked both of those things. So I really liked the character of Agnieszka, I think is how you say her name, and Homeboy, I can never remember his name, but the wizard. I liked both of them. I'm a sucker for a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and there's definitely elements of that. This is also sort of a take on the Baba Yaga kind of mythology from Eastern Europe. There's a lot of interesting pieces of this world, and that's the other thing I tend to like is interesting world building. I'm not someone who's ever going to be super interested in well, according to section 2.2 of my magic system rules, you cannot do X, Y, and Z. I'm never somebody who's super up into the magic systems being super detailed and well thought. I don't care about that. I just want them to be cool, and I want them to sell me on it. And this did both of those things. So ostensibly, these are all ingredients that should have added up to a book that I loved. And this added up to a book that I liked and thought was interesting, but didn't super connect with. I think I chalk that up to the fact that I think the pacing in this was quite odd. I just feel like there's a big chunk in the middle of this book where it probably could have just been cut. I think this is a book that's way too long, for one thing. And I don't know. I just think the pacing on this was odd and kept me from just loving it. I will say I really love the dynamic between Agnieszka and her friend, who I can't remember her name right now, exploration of friendship and kind of sisterhood, and how you have jealousy between friends in a way that's not catty, I thought was really cool. All that to say, there was a lot of pieces of this that I liked, and I guess the surprise here is just that those pieces didn't come together into something that I loved. I have also decided, because I had Spinning Silver in physical copy, I'd gotten that as a Book of the Month Club pick at some point. I didn't like this enough to read Spinning Silver because the reviews on Spinning Silver are skewed much more towards the negative, and I was like, okay, if I was only, you know, not loving this one, I don't think that's one I'm gonna like. But I do have her first book in her, I think it's called His Majesty's Dragon series. I have that on ebook, and I will continue with her because I liked her as a writer. This particular book just didn't like fully come together for me. So anyway, liked but didn't love. Will try more from her, but not in this kind of series she has going. Another surprise was Another Little Christmas Murder by Lorna, Nicholl, Morgan. So this was another one I read in an effort to find books that were isolated closed circle mysteries with a nice little Christmas flair to it. So this is another one that is going to be in my 3 mystery book review coming out here in a couple weeks. So you will get my full thoughts there. For now, I will just say, this is the book that reminded me after I read A Christmas Party by Georgette. Ooh, can you hear that thunder? Hopefully power does not go off. This is the book that reminded me that actually, yeah, like I really do, like in this time period, there are writers who write in a way that I really connect with. I really connected with the writing in this one, the same way that earlier this year, I was very happy to discover I really connected with Cyril Hare's writing. This is just really light and fun, and the main character, Dilys, is a really interesting main character. There's also a dude named Inigo Brown, which I feel like is very golden age of detective fiction-y, who's kind of the main male lead in this one. And Dilys is just super plucky, super fun. She is running basically an MLM, which I didn't love, but Dilys was a lot of fun. And then there's some content in this that I can't get into because it would be spoilery, but like it surprised me, came out of left field to me, and I was like, this was written in 1947? Okay, interesting. So there's some interesting parts of this book, and all in all, it would be the one that I would definitely recommend over A Christmas Party. I wouldn't say that this is like overly Christmassy, but is very, like, the snow is a big piece, so it feels very wintry. Yeah, anyway, all in all, I ended up really liking this, and I would absolutely try something else from this author because I really liked her writing style. She didn't handle some of the action scenes very well, and that's basically what kept me from really loving it because I think it got a little muddled, but overall, this was super fun. And then we come to Nevermore. I did it, guys. I finally finished reading this book. I was going back and forth ultimately between the physical book and the audiobook on this, and I will tell you I liked the audiobook, so for whatever that's worth. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I am currently probably like 70% of the way through the sequel to this, which is Wondersmith, which I think I'm probably gonna end up giving 4 stars to. This is a series where I personally very much prefer the sequel to the original book. Did you guys hear that? There's like real big thunder. Okay, whatever, you're fine. Please, power don't go off. I definitely very much preferred the sequel, so far anyway, to the original book, though I did really like this, and this got me very intrigued to keep going. Like, I liked all the world setup of this, but the book itself, I'm kind of surprised how much people just love it. I like a lot of the stated themes in this. I will tell you that I think some of the stated themes are undermined by the actual plot of this book. One of the stated themes is that it's not just important that you have your special magical power because this is a fantasy world. If you don't know about this book, I'm not even gonna bother summarizing it for you because this has been everywhere and you can find somebody to give you a full review, but basically this is, I think it undermines the idea of a chosen one in an interesting way because it's the idea that she's a chosen one in a negative sense because she is the cursed child. I think that was interesting, but you know, she has a magical gift and she doesn't know what it is, but you know, her mentor does. And she's trying to get into magical boarding school, basically. She's in this year-long competition to get into magical boarding school, though I guess she's not technically boarding there, whatever. The stated themes of this are, it's not enough just to have magic, you also have to have bravery and kindness and curiosity or openness. That's the stated theme, but there is one character who is also competing to be in the school who is the antithesis of all of that. Like, it's the typical like middle grade antagonist, because that person is pretty much allowed to prosper almost this entire book. And I just don't think that that stated theme makes sense given what actually is happening in the book. I do really love, there's a lot of kind of themes around immigration in this that I thought were great. That was actually the themes that I personally thought were much stronger in this book. But the surprising piece of this is, this made me really wonder about if I had read Harry Potter as an adult, if I would like it as much, because I was so distracted in this book by two things. One, there is a certain plot pattern that happens again and again, which also happens in Harry Potter. I'm not trying to say that this is a unique problem to this book. I think it's maybe just kind of a part of middle grade fantasy that they're like, in this kind of story, the same things happen again and again. I just found that really distracting that I could so nakedly see what the plot pattern was of like how each like section of the book was gonna play out. I found that distracting. And then the other thing that I found very distracting was I was so alarmed. Even though Jupiter North, I know is meant to read as like fun and like just a good guy and whatever, I just was so distracted by the way this adult was handling his responsibilities as a guardian to this child, especially a child who is in the country he brought her to illegally. I was so distressed by that piece. Even though I liked him as a character, the way that that dynamic was playing out was so distracting to me because I was so anxious on her behalf. And especially the way some of the things play out towards the end of this book, really, I was alarmed on her behalf. And so again, I think that that's just a part of the genre. I don't think that this is like a problem per se with this book, but as an adult reader of it, it was very distracting to me. And I would say that that continues into the next book, but because the next book, I don't know why, but the plot pattern in it doesn't bother me as much, or I don't find it as distracting. Overall, I'm jiving with that one a lot better, and like a lot of the world setup in this one is done by the time you get to the second book or whatever. So I don't know. The second one is working for me more, and I think, like I said, I think I'll give that 4 stars. I will 100% continue in the series because I think it's really fun. Hopefully my niece isn't watching this, but she's getting this for Christmas because I think she would really like it. And just overall, this is a good book. I like it. I was interested to see my response to this middle grade fantasy novel that is so reminiscent of Harry Potter as an adult, because it really did make me question how I would have responded to Harry Potter if I had read it for the first time as an adult. Okay, and now we are to the hits. I think a couple of these I can get through pretty quickly. So first, I have Part-Time Husband by Noelle Adams. I mentioned this in my mid-month wrap-up, so I will not say much about it other than I really enjoyed this little trio of trophy husbands. Like, it's a little trilogy that Noelle Adams did with these sisters. She has a few different series actually with a trio of sisters, and I really like this one. Part-Time Husband in that series was my favorite one of the three, but all of them were just really light, fun contemporaries that I can just trust Noelle Adams to deliver on. Noelle Adams is one of those authors who, if you like one of her books, you're probably going to like most of her books, and I always appreciate when I find those because if they've got a big backlist, there's lots to enjoy. So wanted to mention that I still considered that to be a hit for the month. Then we come to Born Again Bodies by R. Marie Griffith, which is Flesh and Spirit in American Christianity. So there's a few things I wanted to mention about this. First, I want to say that this is definitely an academic book. This was clearly written with an academic audience in mind. It is structured like an academic nonfiction work, in this case, a work of historical nonfiction. And I think that for that type of nonfiction, where it's clearly meant to be cited, it's very careful about its sourcing in terms of, you know, citations and whatnot. It is very readable, and I really appreciated that, because I always love it when I come across a book like this that does read very nicely, because it's a reminder, hopefully to the rest of the field, that you can make things that are readable that are still academically serious. So props on that. I also really enjoyed the exploration of this book because basically this is charting a history of American white Protestantism's relationship or view of like dieting and exercise and like how the body plays into that religion and as it manifests in America. And one of the things that I found, I guess I just hadn't really thought about this before, but my kind of key takeaway from this was just the dualism that is so baked in, not just to American Christianity, but into American culture itself. She's kind of making the argument, and I would agree, that a lot of that comes from the puritanical roots and this idea of the body being suspect and the body, the ability to shape and dominate your body being a manifestation of your spirituality and your control, like your spirit or your spiritual control over the physical. My degree, my master's, is technically in religion. It was all focused in religion and literature, but religion nonetheless. So I had to take a lot of religious philosophy type classes. And this idea of dualism in Christianity always comes up again and again. And, you know, it's definitely not unique to Christianity in terms of religions that were arising in the same time that Christianity did. But it is so interesting because there is sort of a textual repudiation of dualism in Christianity, but existentially or phenomenologically, it always comes up, this idea that the body is lesser than the spirit. And that's why Gnosticism was so appealing kind of in the early days of Christianity. Like Gnostic Christianity was such a big thing. And basically all that to say, it is so interesting because I don't think that there's many Christians in America who would say that their theology says that if your body is not in shape or whatever, that is a manifestation of spiritual weakness. I don't think that many people would say that. I think they might talk about like, well, gluttony is a sin or whatever. But I don't think they would go that far. But I think in terms of phenomenologically, how that is taught in churches, this very much resonated with me, that is definitely a message, especially to girls. And I mean, a lot of this I can only speak to on behalf of girls, but there was a lot of ED in the fundamentalist high school I went to. I think one of my friends went back and did some work with that high school, and I think she found something like 70 or 80% of the girls had some form of ED. That is definitely something I have struggled with, and I will tell you that because I've been having a lot of anxiety and grief things since the death of my father, ED has been a much more real thing. It's been much more active for me this year. You're never fully in recovery, and this year has been a lot harder for me on that score. And I did find parts of this triggering, like specifically to ED. So I would give you that warning before you read this, especially if your ED has any kind of religious origin to it, which mine definitely does. But anyway, all that to say, I'm kind of rambling, but I will just mention that I thought that this was really well written. I thought it was very interesting, and it gave me a lot to think on. I don't know that this is like top-notch nonfiction, because I don't think this is something I could just hand to anyone and say, hey, I think this is well written enough or interesting enough that anybody could read it. But if any of these topics appeal to you, I definitely think that you would enjoy it. But anyway, all in all, I give this 4 stars. This was definitely a hit for me for the month, and it gave me a lot to mull on and a lot to take to therapy, to be totally honest with you. This was good food for me and my therapist. And then I did want to shout out what I think might end up being my very favorite, but is certainly currently my favorite Christmas-related book I've read so far this year, outside of like An English Murder. I read that back in the summer, but like novella to get me in the spirit kind of a thing recently. And that was The Earls Christmas Pearl by Megan Frampton. So remember at the beginning of us talking about all of these books, I did not enjoy No Groom at the End, but I very much like this one, and I'm so glad I read this one before reading No Groom at the End, because I would not have tried more from her if I'd reversed that order. The Earl's Christmas Pearl is my favorite Christmas novella so far. It is a historical. It is just so fun. Like, it knows what it is and it's having a good time. And that is something that's like an authorial posture that I love in a book. I love it when an author is like, I'm writing something fun. You're going to have fun with it. Let's just go on this ride together. I love that. So the premise of this is a daughter of a duke, so a lady in, I guess, the Regency, maybe in Victorian times. It didn't really matter. It's not that rooted in being historically accurate. Y'all know how I feel about that. I could give 2 flips about that. I've had that rant enough. I don't need to go into it again. But if that matters to you, you will not like this. Don't read this novella. But anyway, so she's sometime in ye old distant past in the 19th century in England. She's the daughter of a duke, and she goes with her mother to Ton, and her mother forgets to bring her back with her when she leaves. So it's Home Alone in the Regency or Victorian era. So she is left home alone, and all the servants are gone. So she's in her townhouse, and she quickly realizes that she doesn't know how to like start a fire or really cook for herself very much. And she notices that across the way, staying in one of the friends of her family's townhomes, is a gentleman with a corgi, who he is walking, and his corgi's name is Mr. Shorty. Oh, it was adorable. She, asked him for help, and, love flourishes. So it's like a snowed in trope. It's a play on Home Alone, and there's a corgi. And it's just so cute. It was so fun. He was like this Welsh Earl, hence Earl's Christmas Pearl. And it was just a ton of fun. I had so much fun reading this. This is like I said, my favorite Christmas novella. If you're looking for something light, historically, just quick, fun, whatever, with a little smut thrown in, You're gonna like this. I really enjoyed it. One of my favorite books I read this month. So I would give that one 4 stars, and yeah, just super fun. Okay, I have 2 more hits. I'm losing steam here, so we gotta land this train. But so for Nonfiction November, this was my sport themed one, because it's, you know, diet exercise. This was my design one, just because I thought the cover design on this was so great. And then for my truth one, I ultimately, since I didn't actually end up finishing Essays in Understanding, I ended up going with Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And I called this truth just because it was just beautiful. It's a book that's basically infusing. So Robin Wall Kimmerer is of Indigenous Native origins, and she is basically using this book to like reclaim Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous scientific knowledge in our, basically, I guess how we would describe it, and marrying that with like contemporary scientific understandings, talking about how just because Indigenous ways of scientific knowledge are not rooted in the scientific method per se, there's still a lot of truth to be found there and different narratives around how we think about science and nature. And this is a topic that is so close to my heart, guys, because one of my like little hobby horses is that you guys know I'm into scientific ways of knowing. Like, it's important to me. I read a lot of nonfiction that is rooted in science. Like, science is awesome. I love it. But it is not enough to construct a full, like a holistic theory of how we know things. Basically, objective knowledge in our parlance often wants to kind of usurp affective knowledge coming out of the Enlightenment. And I think part of what's really cool about postmodernism is that we're reclaiming some of this, but this idea of affective knowledge as being a valid way of knowing is something that I am so into. And I just like, people who get like people who want to think of themselves basically as like robots of knowledge, and that like everything can be just binary and like that's the only like real way to know something. Like I'm just not into that. So anyway, I just love that this was a really serious interrogation of those 2 different ways of knowing and how they can arrive at the same thing, but with different narratives around them, and how that gives different meaning or valence to the same piece of knowledge. It was just great, and the writing in this is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I read it almost like poetry. I will tell you that the reason I didn't give this a 4.5 or a 5 star, because I think maybe like objectively this is a 5-star book. I wouldn't say that this like personally just like was one of my very favorites. So that's why I couldn't quite get it all the way up to a 5-star. But like objectively this and then the next book we're going to talk about were the 2 best books I read this month. And it's something I would really recommend. If you are interested in science writing, but at all, you will like this. I think if you're okay with a little woo-woo, which I am, I'm down with that. I think you're gonna like this. It's just beautiful, and it reads like a memoir. It's kind of like a nonfiction genre blend, which you guys also know I really enjoy. Yeah, it's just really excellent. I see why this was so highly recommended. I would very much recommend this to you. Yeah, just super good, super solid. Probably the best nature writing I've ever read in terms of just the beauty of the prose. And then finally, my personal favorite book that I read this month was She Said by Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. And again, I've talked about this a lot already, so I don't know that I need to go on about this at length. Like, this book really hit me. I think I mentioned in my mid-month wrap-up that the epilogue of this book just made me cry. And I guess it's not, I'm trying to decide if I can tell you vaguely what it is. Basically, the epilogue of this book is them bringing together a lot of the people who have been a part of the Me Too movement from different fields or different areas or arenas, and letting them talk to each other about their experiences. It was so good. But this book is just excellent all around. You don't know, it's about how Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey broke open the Harvey Weinstein case. They were the first ones to publish about it, followed very quickly by Ronan Farrow. And I think what this book does differently than Ronan Farrow's, and I talked about this a little bit in my mid-month wrap-up in terms of if I think you should read both, but I think what this book does really well is that it centers that Harvey Weinstein Me Too moment in the context of what was happening at the time, which was only 2 years ago, but Lord, doesn't it feel like it's been a decade? It really does. It's been a long 2 years in terms of the news cycle. So it can be kind of hard to put your mind back there. But I think it does a really good job of contextualizing that moment. I had kind of forgotten that this was right when like a lot of that Cosby stuff was breaking, like really getting full momentum. A lot of allegations about Trump were coming out at the time that Twohey was covering. And so it just does a really good job of centering that. I think it also gives a lot more context of what was happening inside the Harvey Weinstein, or like the Weinstein business machine, more so than Catch and Kill did. I think that this kind of got inside that organization more and into Weinstein's headspace a little bit more. You hear from his brother in this book and his point of view, which I thought was really interesting. Basically, this is just a different layer, a different valence to a lot of the same incidences, and new ones and different ones that I didn't hear about in Catch and Kill. Slightly different reporting, but a lot of overlap. And then it also, from that story, then goes into other Me Too things. It kind of explores how the Me Too movement kind of exploded from there. And it does spend a lot of time on the Kavanaugh hearing and Christine Blasey Ford, and they were kind of encamped with her and her lawyers during that. So you see behind the scenes, that was the part that was really difficult for me to sit through. I think any of us who understand or have experienced sexual violence, just that whole incident was very difficult to watch play out. And it was very difficult to listen to it again. Again, that epilogue really brought all of it together for me, and ultimately it felt very encouraging. But yeah, it just was reading that and Catch and Kill so close to each other was one of my favorite reading experiences this year. Really special, really significant to me. And I just really recommend both of these books. And She Said, I also love the centering, like the idea of she said, even just that title, the idea of the he said, she said, this idea that for too long, he said, she said really has meant he said. And I take the title to mean that we're finally at a point where that's not the case, and that the she said actually has weight. And so this was my nonfiction November choice for voice. And I really do feel like this was a book that left me feeling very empowered as a woman, in terms of just like, we might finally maybe be getting to a point in history where women's voices are actually heard. I think we've seen movement in that direction. And so that was just exciting and cool. All that to say, yeah, I really love this book. Would definitely recommend. And I would say it was definitely my favorite read of the month. And then it and Catch and Kill was one of my favorite reading experiences of the year. I gave both of those books 4 stars, but the experience of reading them both together, I would give like 5 stars. I think that will do it for all the books I wanted to talk about. Okay, guys, I feel like I need to like go export and edit this really quickly so that you guys have a video to see, because I'm a little worried my power might go out. It sounds like Thor has been angered, and he's not fucking around. So I'm gonna go do that, but definitely let me know how your month of November went reading-wise. If you participated in Nonfiction November or any of the other reading challenges that were happening, let me know how that went. And yeah, I think that will do it for now. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you're so inclined. I have all of that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.